Shabbat Shalom. So I've introduced Chancellor Emeritus Eisen in many places at many times. I'm grateful for that. So I don't remember which stories I've told where. And we're going to start with the first time that I met the Chancellor. I know it's Emeritus, but I can't say anything but Chancellor, I'm sorry. Which was my first day of rabbinical school. I came to rabbinical school. I wasn't big in the conservative world before it. I didn't know what a chancellor was. I didn't really know what JTS was. And we were all kind of waiting for, it was I think the first week the chancellor was going to address all the rabbinical students, and everyone was kind of milling around. And I was hearing a lot of he's not a rabbi, and it's the first chancellor since Cyrus Gordon who isn't a rabbi, and oh man, how's he going to be with rabbinical students? It's whoa, he's a scholar. And that was a lot of the discussion among the students. I don't know if you knew that, Chancellor, but now you do. And so there that was the talk, and then what? And then the Chancellor Eisen came in, and he opened with 10 minutes of a speech in Hebrew, and only in Hebrew. And I watched all the people who had been oh, he's not a rabbi, have no clue what the Chancellor was saying. And it was a beautiful and politic move. And then, thankfully, to someone who'd been in rabbinical school for 3 days, he switched to English. And the rest of his talk was so beautifully tailored to speak to at least my soul, if not everyone's in the room, and what it meant to take on the mantle of religious leadership, and what it meant for him and for us. And it was just, in that moment I knew that this was someone that I wanted to hear more from, and someone that I wanted to follow. Because the Chancellor has been able to, throughout his career, and his works are amazing, and his books are great, and there's a new one out, and we have some copies, and it's going to be awesome to hear about. But to be able to speak from the depth of knowledge that he can about all of the thinkers who've come before him, and at the same time be one of those thinkers and speak to all of our hearts as well as our minds, is a tremendous gift, as it is a tremendous gift for him to be with us this morning. So Chancellor Eisen, we welcome you to the Bima, and it's yours. We'd love to hear your words at this time.
In English. It's a delight to be back in the company of this congregation and one of my very favorite rabbis in the world. One of the things I most miss about being chancellor is traveling around North America and talking to Jews about this tradition and this community of ours, which are dear to me. When I first became chancellor, here's another story. One of my very first speeches was in a very big congregation in Baltimore. And I had gone on for a while talking about how we need to revitalize Jewish tradition and we need to strengthen Jewish communities. And then there was a question and answer period. And this is a moment I will never forget. It was either the back row or the second from the back row. A teenager stood up and said, quote, I remember the words exactly, quote, "But Professor Eisen, what is true?" That really got me. I've been talking for, half an hour about tradition and community, and this kid wanted to know from the Chancellor of JTS, Professor of Judaism, what was true. I have to confess, this is the season of confession, I have to confess that I remember the question, but I don't remember at all what I answered. But I hope that I had the presence of mind to answer with words from this week's Parsha, which we know must have been important because the rabbis made sure that every year on the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah, we are going to read Parashat Nitzavim. So we are going to go into the new year with Nitzavim in our consciousness. Some years, like this one, Vayelek is joined to Nitzavim. In 1964, which was the year of my bar mitzvah, Vayelech was a separate portion. I chanted Vayelech on Shabbat Shuvah. That Shabbat will be memorable to all Philadelphians, not because it was my bar mitzvah, but in 1964, under the leadership of Gene Mauch, the Phillies were about to blow the National League pennant and had a disastrous fall from first place, which was only equaled one more time by the New York Mets, as a matter of fact. On that day, I was trying to focus on my bar mitzvah, but I had other things on my mind as well, because the Phillies were about to blow it. But what I want to do today is speak about 4 moments in this Torah portion, the third of which we've already talked about a little bit, which to me are the Torah's answer, or it's an attempt to try to answer some of what this teenager was questioning about what is true. And after all, Moses is at the end. I mean, one of the reasons the speech in Devarim is so long is because Moses has been told by God that when you finish this particular address, you are going to die. This is his last chance to speak to the Israelites. And that's perhaps why multiple times in the book of Deuteronomy, he says, Shema Yisrael, hear it, listen to me, because you're not going to be able to listen to me anymore after this speech. So I want to examine 4 moments in this speech and that I think are particularly important for us as we enter this high holiday season today. The first is at the very beginning of the portion, Moses goes out of his way to tell the Israelites that I'm speaking to all of you, every single one of you. It's the most inclusive phrasing you could possibly have in the Torah. You stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your tribal heads, your elders, your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from wood chopper to water drawer, to enter into this covenant of the Lord your God. Now this is amazing. It doesn't erase distinctions of class and gender and age, but it wants them all to be included, as they have to be if you're going to enter in as a community into covenant or re-enter into covenant, which is what we're all promising ourselves that we're doing when we make tshuva every Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I find this phrasing remarkable. You probably heard it as I read it quickly, but in case you didn't pick up on it, for me, the most remarkable words in this portion are not only are we erasing class distinctions and gender distinctions and age distinctions, but it's also including Gercha asher bekerev machanecha, even the stranger, the non-Israelite within your gate, is included in this covenant because they're living with you. And we know you've got no chance of any significant social reform, which is what Deuteronomy wants. You've got no chance of building a society of justice and compassion if only the Israelites are going to be involved. This has to be all-inclusive. And so you have people living with you who are not yet completely members of this community, and yet they are included in this covenant ceremony, which is remarkable. And then, as if that weren't enough, he continues to say, Lo imachem levadchem anochi koreit et habrit hazot. Not with you alone am I making this covenant, but with those who are not here with you today. And he specifically mentions the people of the past and of the future. So this, I love this because it reaches out to me. It's as if the Torah knows that more than 2,000 years after it was written, there are going to be people who are reading this book not as an academic book taken off the shelf as a book of history or a book of literature, but as people who are committed to this project, which the Torah lays out, such that here we are in synagogue in Philadelphia, PA, in the year 2024, reading these words and knowing that they are for us. So when you live as a Jew, it's one of the glories and also one of the burdens. You know that it's not just for you as an individual, it's for you as part of a community, and it's not just for you as a community, it's for your community as part of a larger society and a nation and a world, and you live with the consciousness that you are carrying on a legacy from past generations, and that you are the legacy that will be transmitted to future generations, and in generations in the future, they will know that they have this covenant because you kept it the same way that we have it, because our ancestors, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, whatever, kept this covenant. It's ours. And Deuteronomy knows this and lays it out for you right there. That's the first moment that I wanted to tell that teenager. You should know that in no sense are you alone. You are part of a community and a people and a society and a world and a covenant that transcends your lifetime. You're part of a story that's a lot older than you are, a story that was here before you and will be here after you. The second moment that's really precious to me, and I called my book Seeking the Hiding God, there's a line in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verses 28, which we often hear about, but people, the commentators that the rabbi mentioned, usually take it in a different sense. The verse says the following thing: concealed things, the nistarot, the mysteries, concern the Lord your God, but the overt acts is for you and your children ever after to apply all the provisions of this teaching. And they read that too often as saying, okay, you're coming up in the season of repentance, you should know that God knows all the things that you're in your heart. Nothing is concealed from God, so you better be open in your confession because God knows them anyway, and plead for God's forgiveness. I read this verse as having nothing to do with that. That's not what it's about, I think. What this verse is telling us is that you get to a certain point in your life, and I think that teenager at the age of 16 was already there because he wants to know the truth of things. He's probably got questions. Maybe there was some sickness in his family or a tragedy. Why could these things happen? Why are there wars? Why is there terrible injustice? Why is there persecution? Why does it seem to get worse and worse and worse? Terrible things keep happening. If there's a good God, why is this happening? And here is Moses, in the name of God, at the end of his life, when he's about to say his final words to the children of Israel, saying, the answer to that question is, I don't know. We don't know. The Torah does not know the answers to these questions because the mysteries belong to the Lord your God. And it's not as if you were smarter or you were mystic and had more mystical ceremonies and magic spells and stuff, you would get into the secrets. No one knows the answer. The answers are not to be had because we are mere mortals. Some things are not accessible to us. Even Moses, who stood at the top of Mount Sinai and was closer to God, according to the Torah, than any human being ever had been before, even Moses does not know and has to proclaim there are these mysteries that belong to God, but, the but is huge, we have the revealed things which belong to us and to our children to do the words of this Torah. In other words, you can do the things that are necessary to make the world more just and compassionate, to live a life knowing that when you leave life, the world will be better because you were here. You can do this. We all can do this. We have the guidance of the Torah. We have human wisdom. We have knowledge. We have arts. We have sciences. We have other traditions. We have the experience of our lives, of being parents and children. And so we have what we need. This is precious. I couldn't go on without this. There would be no chance for any of us. We couldn't do tshuva at this holiday season if we thought it was all hopeless. You can't. You have to have some confidence that it's not all hopeless. So, Rabbi Butkovsky quoted the great commentators. I studied this verse with Rashi and Ibn Ezra and Ramban, and I think he mentioned Sforno. I have to tell you, the commentators who taught me the most about this verse were the Rolling Stones. Now you're all supposed to be thinking, what verse from the Rolling Stones is he thinking about? The verse which says, you can't always get what you want. You can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find that you get what you need. That's this verse. We have what we need. Life can be good. The world can be better. There's joy, there's love. We've got each other. It's good. Then that's the background for the verse that you all commented on a few minutes ago. It's not in heaven. It's not beyond the sea. And the it here, I think, is this davar. God may not be immediately accessible. That's why I have called my book The Hiding God, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But if you have this Torah, and the davar here is not just the word, but the things that the words create, the facts on the ground that we put there in keeping with Torah, the justice we do, and the love that we share, that, if you have all of that, then that is not too far from you. That is in your mouth and your heart. And even though you don't have God as close as you would want all the time, and you don't have the truth of things, you've got those things that you need. Now, in the very next parsha, in Vayelek, God says a couple times, using the same word for the mysteries in Istarot, God said, if you disobey, I'm going to hide my face. And as I mentioned last night, for those of you who heard me, this is a very frequent reaction to the Holocaust on the part of Jewish theologians who throw up their hands and we say, we don't know how a good God could have allowed this to happen. There's a hiding of the countenance, and some thinkers like Martin Buber and others take this as part of the modern condition, that when we live in a world of modern science and modern historical consciousness, God is more hidden than ever. But there are also Jewish commentators, especially Hasidim that I'm fond of, who say this is the human condition. That God is not absent, but God is not clear. God's behind a veil. You can't get what you want out of this knowledge of the world because God's not there to have, but you have enough. It's not across the sea. It's not in heaven. You have this word, this fact, this reality of love and kindness and justice. It's close to you. It's at hand. And then you get the fourth and final affirmation, which Maimonides, in his Laws of Tshuva, quotes because this affirmation is absolutely necessary as we embark on the work of repentance and trying to be better. And this is, of course, the verse, two verses actually, where God says, I've set before you good and evil, and blessing and curse, and life and death, and then the most important you can choose. Now, I think the Torah is not unaware of the fact that we don't get to choose everything in this life. In fact, there are a lot of things that we don't get to choose at all. But you're born when you are, where you are, with the parents you have, and as we say, you're dealt a certain deck of cards, dealt in certain hands, and you have to play the hand you're dealt. But in those limitations, there's a lot of room for choice. And you can choose all the time. In fact, what Deuteronomy would say is whether you know it or not, you are choosing all the time. But if you've ever had kids, one of my memories from when my kids were little is that they would repeat back to you words that you cannot believe you actually said. But they heard them, and they repeat them. You made a choice when you said those dvarim. And when you behaved a certain way with your kids or your friends or your spouse or your parents, you put a davar into the world. And these dvarim you put out there add up. And yet, with all the bad choices you make, sometimes you make really good choices, which leads you to be convinced, you should be convinced, that if you do good choices some of the time, you could do good choices more of the time, and so it's not a hopeless task. So my hope is that when we encounter those teenagers in the world, and they need not be 15 or 16 years old, and they want to know from you, having lived your life, so what do you think is true? I hope we have the wisdom to answer them well and to answer them not just with words, but with examples. I'm having the great opportunity to talk to you more about this and about the book, and the rabbi and I are going to dialogue after services, after lunch, so I hope you'll stick around and we'll be able to talk more about these things, and maybe you can share parts of this Parsha that you love as much as I love Parshat Nitzavim. Shabbat Shalom.